Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Buenas, this is Cisco Gallardo with the Healing Generations podcast, Yelder Edition. I want to say tlazo to our listeners, all our supporters, and all those that want to learn about the traditions of healing through an indigenous lens. Tiawi. So before we get started, I want everyone to take time to chill a little bit, transition, whatever you're doing or whatever you are doing. If you're working, driving in your car, just take a moment. And I want you to think about all the men in your life as we face east. We want to think of all the men that have been in our lives, our fathers, our grandfathers, our sons, our uncles, our homies. We want to think about them, what they bring to the table, what they bring in our lives, and how that affects us. And then we're going to pivot to the West. And there's a spectrum between male and female. We want to honor our relatives in that spectrum as well. They're finding out who they are and the blessings that they bring for us. But as we face the West, we want to think about our grandmothers, our mothers, our partners. Think about our daughters, our aunties, our coworkers, all those women in our life, We want to think about them. Think about the gifts that they bring to us, their ways, the way they help us. We want them to be here with us, to bring their energy. So we're always cognizant of what they provide for us in our life. And then as we pivot all the way around to the north, we think about our ancestors, those that lived before us, those that paved a way for us. Those that did things that we don't even know about, that helped us go to college, helped us survive, helped us provide a way to provide our teachings, the stories, the artists, all those craftsmen and women who held on to our teachings for us. So I want to think about them, and I want to think about our elders too. All our elders in our lives that they help us, and sometimes we don't always acknowledge. I want to think about them. Right now, in several parts of the country, it's hot, and a lot of them don't have AC. They don't have people visiting them. They're lonely. I want them to feel good too. And I want us to remember them in our everyday life, And then as we pivot one more time to the South and we think about the children, the future generations, not just our current children, but the children that are yet to come. The children that don't know about racism. They don't know about colonization. They don't know about trauma. I want them to feel good when they come. And I hope that we do the work for them. I hope that we do the work that we could take away some of that they never have to experience that. And even our children that are here, I want all their what ifs in their life to be that way. I want them to capture all their goals, whatever they're striving for. I really want that for them, an easier life. All our children, and I don't mean just little babies, but I'm talking about even middle schoolers, elementary schoolers are going back to school. It's scary. With the COVID and with the violence and different things. I want them to be all right. I want them to feel confident. I want them to feel comfort. And of course, I want to acknowledge the sky, the sun, the one that shines upon us, Sometimes we complain, it's not here. It's too hot. It's too cold. But no matter what, it shines its light on us. Even if we can't see it, it's there, Even on a cloudy day, we know it's there. And maybe that sunlight representing hope. And then put our hands down to the earth, and we think about Don Unseen, we think about Mother Earth, whatever you call her, we want to think about all the blessings she provides for us, just the positive, you know, and that somehow we could find a way to be responsible and be accountable to her, do a little bit if we can to protect her, just do our part, and press the companies that really affect her. A lot of times they put us, but I want us to also think about those companies and really stand up for her too when we have a chance. And then I want us to think right in the center. Whatever you believe in, whatever creator, even if you're an atheist, I want you to think about just the blessing of life. Just a blessing. We're here and we want to make the best of it and we want to make the best of our lives. And we want to make sure that we feel connected in some way, that unity that we can have. I want it to be like that, a whole. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking that time to acknowledge the directions that way. Sometimes it's important just every day to take the time and really think about that. So we have a special guest today. Well, he's special for me because I trip out on all the things he's a part of. His name is Sergio Morales, and I'm gonna let him introduce himself. I want you to share a little bit about yourself, your family, your background, your journey to this point in life.
Cool. Thank you, Cisco. So good to be here and share some space with you. Looking forward to this conversation and honored that be able to join this podcast and this conversation with you. So, my name is Sergio Morales. That's the name that my family gave me, and I wear that with pride. My family comes from Zacatecas, Mexico. Both my parents, they have a long history in Zacatecas. My mother coming from more of a farm, more of a connection to the land, right? From a small pueblito and a rancho. And my father coming more from the city, from Fresnillo. And both of them coming to this part of the Americas in the early 60s, with my mother coming in the early 60s and being a domestic worker on the west side of Los Angeles and living with families and helping to raise kids of wealthy white families as a live-in domestic worker. As a young woman, 14, 15 years old, helping to raise a family and children and wash clothes and do that domestic work. And my father coming after finishing high school with his family. And they did what they needed to do to live and start their lives. And then they met studying English in English school, learning English in their late teens, and decided to start a family and get married. And they built some roots in the east side of Los Angeles, like many Mexicanos did at that point in time in the mid to late 60s. And definitely working class, and were factory workers and landed union jobs. My father was an organizer and a union organizer. And, through having good union jobs, we're able to, build up a family and build up a livelihood which provided them the ability to purchase, a home after a few years, and moved out of East Los and moved over to the San Gabriel Valley and, purchased their first home in the 70s in Pico Rivera. And, that's the neighborhood that I grew up in. Very working class community. I have one older sister, and that was our small little family, And with that, my parents, my father was able to complete high school in Mexico, and my mother was was able to work, and was able to complete what education she was able to complete in Mexico. But she was also comes from a large family, right? She's one sibling of 12, and my father was one sibling of 9. So my mother had to work to support herself and her family, but really herself, right? And my parents were really knew one thing in this country, knew that they wanted different for their children, of course, like many immigrants in this country, I think, do, and knew that the value of education was important for them, and they wanted something different and better for their children. And so they invested their ganancias, right? They invested what they could into their education of their children, and Catholic education was what they felt was the best thing for their children. And so my sister and I were afforded the opportunity, the privilege, the luxury of Catholic education for them, or, in their eyes, right? And I would say we benefited from that. I know I definitely did. So grew up, with lots of family. Again, my mom is one of 12. My father is one of 9, and everybody had children, right? So there was lots of cousins, lots of family gatherings, lots of events, lots of carne asadas. Every weekend was always with family gatherings, events, cumpleaños, bautizos, quinceañeras, all the wonderful Mexican working class immigrant gatherings that we do, right? And so that's how we grew up. My parents were really involved in their community and really involved in their church, and that was kind of their social network. My father was a musician, and that was our family. And with that, there was lots of good and lots of beauty and lots of celebrations and cultural traditions and celebration. And I think in addition to that, there was also lots of unhealthy things, right? As beautiful and as celebratory it was, I think there was also a lot of pain and trauma, right? There was generational alcoholism, right? And generational pain and trauma that came with that. And my father was in a lot of pain and was an alcoholic, and an abusive one at that, right? So I grew up in a home that had alcoholism and abuse, but that wasn't talked about, right? Because my father was an esteemed leader, was an esteemed musician, was well known, very charismatic. Lots of people in the community recognized him, knew him, hired him to sing at all their family events. And didn't know that he also was in a lot of pain and trauma, right? And there was violence in the home, right? And through his pain and addiction to alcohol, caused a lot of violence and pain in our home and in our family, And with that, there was a lot of distrust and confusion and pain in my life as a young man, as a child, and things that I was told not to talk about outside of the home, right, and not to tarnish or bring shame to the family of talking about that outside of the home, and really wanting to protect the family image and the family name and the reputation, if you will, right, and how do I hold that as a young child, respecting and loving my parents, but being really confused by the man that my father would become after he drank and became abusive, verbally and emotionally abusive, and physically, to me and my mom and my sister, right? But then when other people were around, that would completely disappear, right? So we had to learn strategies as to how to avoid my father's abusive behavior, right? So it was always like, have somebody else outside of the home be with us, right? So anytime there was a family party, there was an event, it was always like, well, how do we get another family member to come home and stay the night with us because he wouldn't act out, right? So how do we get a cousin or a tia or somebody just be like, oh, spend the night with us, spend the weekend with us, right? Because then we knew Dad would be on good behavior, right? And wouldn't act out. Um, So there was lots of nights or times, there was episodes as a child where I grew up with that, right? Or having to break up fights, having to be a peacekeeper in my home, having to strategize with my mom or my sister, just with miradas sometimes, right? Of like, how do we make sure that we're going to de-escalate situations? How do I keep my father's anger and his rage at bay, or de-escalate it or calm him down as a 7, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, right? How do I protect my mother, right, from that rage? And then console her afterwards, right? And process her feelings afterwards and be the family therapist and crisis counselor, right? Not even a young man, as a child, right? So there was a lot of that, right? And then knowing at the same time, going and living through that pain and trauma, and knowing that something was just different about me, right? Knowing that at a very young age, something was just different about me, and I didn't have the words for it. And the times that I did have the words for it, and the times that I would say something, I would get in trouble for it, knowing that I played with my female cousins, right? And I would play dolls with them, and I would play hair with them and makeup with them. But knowing that, like, at the time that my dad was gonna come home, or I was at their house and my tío would come home, like, we always knew when we had to stop before some authority figure was gonna come, and we had to stop playing those games before we would get in trouble, right? And more so, I would get in trouble for playing that, and then they would get in trouble for allowing me to play with them those games that boys shouldn't play with them, right? So there's this real policing of gender, policing of what was appropriate to play and not to play, right? And that was with, not only my cousins, but also like in the home, right? I was always who I was, and I think looking back on it now, and I think the term that people commonly use is say like, oh, or you were effeminate, right? Or you were a femme little boy. That's a term that we could use, but I was going to say, like, I was just always who I was. I was who and that's how I got down. That was just my get down, and I have lots of memories as a kid, right? Like, I mean, Menudo was a big thing when I was a kid. And I remember, the Menudo records and being like, oh, he's cute, and getting slapped, right? Getting slapped as a young child, being like, you don't say that as a kid, right? Like, that, you don't say that. I remember being, I don't know, 5, 6, and being like, this part of me is a boy and this part of me is a girl. And my sister slapping me, right? Like, you don't talk like that. You are a boy, right? So real getting these reinforcements of how wrong that was for me to say, and to articulate that as a child, right? And then my father, of course, recognizing that, right? And him reinforcing what it is to be a man to a child, right? 5, 6, 7, 8. And always that coming out during his drunken rage. And because there was tension, right? Because I was angry at him, because he would act out in drunken rage, and through now I look at it and I turn back, it was his trauma and his pain, because his father was an alcoholic and probably treated him the same way that he treated me. It's generational, right? But looking back on it now, I know that, he was in pain and that's why he was acting out like that with me. But, him policing that and reinforcing this idea of what boys or manhood's supposed to be like as a child. And so I was angry at him. I was angry at the way he treated me and my mother and my family as a child. So then our relationship just started being disconnected through my adolescence and then in my early teens, right? So I always say when I was this age, 11, 12, I started growing up fast, right? In the neighborhood, with my cousins. I always tell folks, like, I turned 18 when I was 12 or 13, and I turned 21 when I was 14. I lived a very fast life. I came to terms with my sexuality when I was 12 years old. I was in, seventh, eighth grade when I said I'm gay. And that was, it was easy and fun for me. It was really, really, really hard for my Mexican, Catholic, factory working parents. They had absolutely no idea what to do, how to handle it. My father and I had no relationship at that point. And we had no relationship. I hated my father at that point. It was not like we didn't have there was hate. I was angry. We barely even talked, and if we did, there was pleito, right? There was shit going down at that point. So it was a rough time, it was a rough time. I was acting out, and what gave me validation and what gave me a sense of self and identity, whether it was, quote unquote good or bad, was the streets, right? And the streets and other young people my age and some folks who were older than me, an identity of having fun and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Growing up in LA, I started living life and going out and seeking validation and seeking community from a scene where I felt I wanted to be seen and validated and build community with other like-minded folks where I wasn't seeing representation of myself. In the streets and in the community I was from, yeah, there was people there that I connected with, but, I wanted to be out in the gay scene with other men who looked and talked like me, and that was in clubs and not always in West Hollywood, because there was a lot of other gay clubs and gay scenes in the east side of LA and in South Central that I connected with. There was lots of other gay youth and young adults that I kicked it and partied with. And then again, this was the early 90s, so it was the height of the HIV AIDS pandemic, right? So there was lots and lots of fear. So we had gang violence, we had HIV AIDS, we had crack and meth, and we had a lot going on in LA at that point in time. We had the uprisings of '92. There was a lot happening in that point in time, and it was fun and exciting and dangerous, and I survived, and I count my blessings because I survived knowing that many others did not, many others my age and definitely older did not, and if we look at it in terms of my age, right, where I was, because I was a young buck, doing really grown things, and, I was in high school going to bars and clubs to the wee hours of the morning, going home and sleeping, and then going to school the next morning, and my parents, because of the dysfunction in the home, my parents just, all they wanted to know and see was that I was getting good grades and I was going to school, and that's what I was doing, I was going to school, getting good grades and doing what I did at night and on the weekends. And some of it was unhealthy, and destructive as a young person, but I always did what I needed to do to maintain the focus I needed to do, and school grounded me. And I had some older folks who mentored me and who sat me down and really just had straight up conversations about keeping myself safe, and really just had some real conversations about what do I need to do to avoid HIV. And that's what it really was about at that point. What do you need to do to not get infected? Because from 1991 to 1995, when I was in high school, really living that life and going out and partying and living a very fast life at a very young age in high school, right? It was really some friends of mine who were a little bit older than me, and some old, at that point, I'm saying older, who were probably like early 20s, and some who were HIV positive that just sat me down and were like, dude, here are the do's and don'ts. And were very explicit and literally said, this is the behavior you do, this is the behavior you don't do. Because if you do this, you will be HIV positive. You cannot do that. Straight up. There was no scared straight. It was just direct, punto y ya, you know? And I really thank those folks because I'm not saying I am better than anybody else, but I really think that those direct talks and serious platicas are what helped me think about my life in a very clear way and put me on a path to really think about, how do I want to live my life? How do I not live in fear? And how do I start thinking about, how do I live as a healthier, queer identified Chicano man for myself, for my family, for my community, to model that there is joy and happiness in our lives. Because at that point in time, there was so much pain, destruction, and sadness in many different people's lives, So.
I remember during that time it was crazy with all the fears. I mean, the first time I heard about AIDS was in the mid '80s, sometime seventh, eighth grade. They talked about it and HIV, and one of my cousins had it, and I'm sure he went through a lot of stuff too. I was too young to kind of realize it, but he was a cousin I was close to. My friends were, my brother was close to him. He was cool. And at the same time, kind of being afraid for his life, really, because he was so much older than me. But it kind of takes us to the next question about what are the lessons that you learned from your culture. Because some people would say this is like counter Mexicano culture, right? Living that lifestyle that people would say it's a lifestyle, not a choice you were born that way. It wasn't like something you thought of, I want to do something alternative to what my family thinks. But how did it help you in your own healing with that? I mean, where did you find that cultural connection, whatever be it your community, the music, whatever it was at that time that helped you heal and develop to kind of who you are today? Was it art? What was it that helped you like really make that reconnection and reclaim who you are, not letting people put you in a box? You know what I mean? When it comes to what a Chicano male is or isn't.
Right. Well, I think that in that point in time, it was a very vibrant scene, the way I described it, I wasn't trying to throw extras on it or make it seem like it was despair, right? But it was just real, right? That's the way it was. It was real. There was a lot of uncertainty. And I think through that, and I think there's similarities now when we think about COVID, right? Like when COVID started about a year ago, and I mean, I started thinking a lot of the parallels of what am I learning about COVID? It started reminding me, like this memory came out from my body of like remembering what it's like of this, like, how do I take care of myself? How do I take care of my community? Like there was parallels from COVID and HIV memories of like, what's out there, what's going to happen, seeing people get sick, all that, right? But in general, going back to your question about what helped me, for me, it was like the club scene was just a really great place to build community, like through the place of sadness or uncertainty or people getting sick and despair. There was just a place to go and meet people and dance and build community and fashion and music and dance moves and people coming together to do fundraisers because people couldn't pay their rent, or doing backyard parties to support each other, to creating art zines. People started creating these, there was this really huge and exciting, like, underground backyard party scene that happened in Los Angeles that was called this whole tea party scene, that were just these party crews. There were these gay party crews that happened, right? There was drag queens that started happening, and drag performances and artistry that, didn't really make it to the mainstream, but people just started knowing about it and creating these families and cultures around that. That's kind of what started, keeping people engaged, and it kept me engaged. And that's where I talked about where, like, I started building community with folks around that. I think that, in addition, at that point, there weren't always many people who were comfortable expressing who they were and sharing their identities with each other. So those of us that were considered to be out at that point in time, visibility was not what it is today. So those of us that were visible and taking that risk really connected with others that were visible. And made those connections even stronger, right? And made that community even stronger with one another, because there weren't TV shows, and there weren't public figures, and there weren't websites, and there weren't rainbow flags everywhere. So those of us that were as visible really made strong connections with each other, and especially young people and adolescents around that. I went to an all-boys Catholic high school, and being who I was and walking with confidence in who I was, in my neighborhood, in my schools, in my family, was challenging many times. There was lots of physical boundaries that needed to be reinforced, for myself and my friends. And they were maintained and held, okay? Let's be real about that. People knew that I was about what I needed to get done. And, my lines were drawn and my boundaries were kept. Okay? Trust. So in that sense, we needed to do what we needed to do. And there was a lot of fighting that needed to happen, both verbally, physically, spiritually, like in all that sense, and lots of communities that had to be formed, lots of educating, lots of patience, lots of organizing, I always say that in my adolescence and as a young adult, I grew up having to kind of organize out of fear. I was organizing out of fear. Like, I don't want to become infected with HIV. I don't want my family members or friends to become infected with HIV, or to be murdered or killed or beaten or harassed or jailed or deported because of who they are. Then out of operating out of fear, then it became operating out of hate. Like, I was hating and I was angry at, like, whiteness and white supremacy, and I was angry at the police and how they treated us and how they would shake people down, and I was angry at, like, how the way, like, straight folks would bash us, and how the way straight folks would treat us and mock us when we were coming out. How, I couldn't walk down the street without somebody yelling "Joto" and throwing bottles at me, or walking out of a McDonald's and having, homeboys throw stuff at me. I would never back down. But, that stuff would happen to me a lot, and my friends, going to the mall and having people not wanting to let us go inside their store because they thought we were going to try on women's clothing, and we were like, we're just going inside the store, it was just crazy in the 90s, right? And I was just really angry about this, right? I remember in my high school, I had a magazine, a gay magazine. It was Out Magazine in my sophomore year in high school. And I got sent to the principal's office and they wanted to suspend me for having a gay magazine during lunch. I was just carrying it. And they wanted to suspend me for that. And boy, I just had to raise hell. And luckily, I had some really great mentors at the high school and people who advocated for me, and that got dropped real quick. But, it was just the mentality at that point, right? People were just scared that I was going to recruit others or influence others just by being me, just by being who I was, breathing air, you know what I'm saying? Walking down the hallway, minding my own damn business. And it wasn't until, I got older and did a lot of healing work, right? Did a lot of healing work. And of course, did a lot of healing work with my father. And my father, just to fast forward a little bit, right? My father got in a really bad car accident my freshman year in college because he was drunk driving, right? He was drunk driving and he had traumatic brain injury and, got in a car accident on the freeway. And luckily, he didn't hit anybody else and he did not harm anybody else. He harmed himself. And even after having, 4 DUIs and, having a couple stints in rehab and, having my mother threaten she was going to leave him a couple times and all that. And it wasn't until he had his severe accident and he was in a coma for some time, was in a rehab hospital for a couple months. And it took him a few months to remember my name and remember who he was. And he was, had to do rehab for a couple months. And he had to remember a lot of things, how to do his mechanical stuff again, right? And we had to do some healing work and how to do some therapy and both physical and therapeutic work, where I got to a point where I was still angry with him, but got to a point where we had to forgive each other. Or excuse me, I had to forgive him and he had to ask for forgiveness from me. And even that wasn't enough, right? It still took some time to heal and build trust and build love with each other. And through my 20s, we did that, and now my father and I and my mother and I, we cool, we are a loving and affirming family, I have an amazing partner that I've been with for 11 years. My partner, Malcolm, and I have spent 11 years of our lives loving each other, affirming each other, growing together, supporting each other and being the best people to each other as a couple, as a family unit. We've gone on family vacations with my parents. When I go to my parents' house, and if I go a couple times and Malcolm isn't with me, my father's like, "Where's Malcolm? Why isn't he here? I miss him. Why don't you bring him? Is he mad at me? I need to see him." Every time I go,
Cool.
and, if Malcolm's not there, my mom always sends him a plate of food. She calls him, "How is he? Where is he?" It's a really different and beautiful experience, and now I say, because of who I am and the journey that I'm on and have been on for the past 20 years in my spiritual journey and the choices that I make and have made since 1999 in the road that I walk in and the medicine that I walk with, now I approach my work and organize my work really out of a place of love, and try to do that out of a place of love. Who I am today, I walk as a person, as a person who practices a spiritual practice that is, really comes from a African tradition, coming from the Yoruba diaspora, but specifically the tradition of the medicine that I walk with is the Lukumi way. And, I started practicing the tradition in 1999 and specifically got initiated as an Olorisha in April 18th, 2009 into the mysteries of Elegua in the Afro-Cuban traditional way as a Lukumi Olorisha, what many folks, I think, call the equivalent of a priest. And, I'm 12 years as a priest in that tradition. And, that medicine that I walk with and the other traditions, the spiritual traditions that I walk with has really allowed me and has given me the tools necessary to really look at the world in a different way and a responsibility, right? First and foremost, between me and creator, right? How do I get aligned between me and creator and giving me the tools that I need to align myself with creator and the destiny that I have and that was given to me when creator Olofi said, you're coming to earth and here's what your plan is when you're on this earth.
Mm.
So that's for me first. And then my egun or my ancestors, right, to get their blessings and support. And then my family, my community, and how do I share the tools and the medicine that I have for community healing and wellness, right? But it's really about, most importantly, just really about me and myself and my family and community wellness, So just to share that as well and how I approach the work that I do.
Well, I mean, that's that kind of like this version of the podcast, of the Healing Generations podcast, is really talking about Yalders, right? We're in a certain position in our lives where we're not old enough to be elders, and we're no longer young adults. We're kind of in our way, they would say we're in this third ridge of life, We're approaching that last ridge, that fourth ridge. And, I'm curious to see what was that, because sometimes in life you have your spiritual life and you have your everyday life. And I think when you reach spiritual maturity, and this takes time, and it's a road you're going to take forever, but there's a time where you kind of try to keep them separate, but at some point they intersect and they just be interwoven into your life. And I think when that happened for me, I really could help more people than just myself. At that point, I needed to stick to me, trying to figure out what I needed. And even though I'm still on this healing journey for myself, I feel like at some point I was ready to share it with other people in a way that made sense. And I sees you, even though as you would say, a priest in that effort, what was that for you, and how do you frame it with your work, and what is your work, and how do you frame it at this time in your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of my DNA. So there's no separation, right? There's, without getting too much into the details, but the ceremony that you go through in this process, it is part of who you are. It is part of your DNA, it is into your body, right? So like there's no separation. Everything I do, I am an Olorisha. I have been initiated into the mysteries of Elegua, right? So I have Elegua crowned on my head. So there is no separation. I don't have the luxury of saying, I'm a priest today, I'm not tomorrow, There's some traditions where you put some garment on or some regalia and you say, okay, I'm doing my duties now, and you take them off, and I'm not doing my duties now, right? It's a sacred tradition and it's a sacred duty. You choose to act to step into your sacred duty or not, So it's how you show up for yourself.
Yeah.
I have to ask myself, am I choosing to show up in my spiritual name that I was given? I was given a spiritual name as Eshutolu, which I was told by my elders in that naming ceremony as part of that 7-day ceremony, that name means Tolu is has a significance, right? It's supposed to be the voice of the people of the town, right? The voice of the town. So I have to show up and say, my name is Sergio Morales, but it's also Eshu Tolu. Am I acting like Eshu Tolu today? Am I, is that who I'm going to be? I cannot not be that. I could choose not to act like that.
Yeah.
I could choose to act like Sergio in 1993, or I could choose to be who I was told to be after 2009. That's when I made that choice, Orisha said they wanted me, and there was a ceremony that needed to happen. In this tradition, like, yes, you have choice to say, yes, I want to do it, but not everybody can be like, oh, I want to be an Orisha priest. Like, there's a there's a process to say, like, Orisha choose you. You are chosen. Not everybody gets to be a priest. You are selected. Orisha says, yes, you are destined to be a Olarisha or not. You're destined to be a priest or not, right? I have to, as a human, as a person, Sergio has to decide, right? Am I going to be acting in the sacred duty or not? And in that sense, it's my responsibility to myself, first and foremost, about how I'm going to show up for myself. And I'm human and I struggle, and there's some days that, like, I get in my human self, and I'm not better than anybody else. I am still human. I still have my good days and I still have my bad days, but I have medicines and tools to help me get through when I have some really, really challenging days. And these past few months, I've had some really, really challenging days. Some of the most challenging days that I think I've ever had in my life, But I have to keep choosing that. I have prayer, I have a connection to ancestors, and I have a connection to elders and people that have been supporting me along my path to help me get through this,
I mean, I think that what's hard for me, and I see this even with you, is even this tradition. I've been trying to learn about it. I've been watching a lot of videos from the outside. I know a lot of people who practice. I know there's various branches and different ways. And but even like for me, it's like even when you do your work, you're still that person. But sometimes revealing it to other people sometimes is problematic, just because there is this expectation in our world because of colonization, because of who we are. They don't want us to be our full authentic self. And I know you're one of those people who are unapologetic. This is who I am. Bam. I'm the same way in a lot of ways, with a lot of my own traditions. But, I think that's a part of it. Is I think a lot of Yalders struggle with that. And not everybody wants to be a spiritual leader. They just want to be able to feel good about who they are, honor life, do all those things, And as a man who wears many hats, and not only that, like, the things you've been through in life, I think that's one of the advice that a lot of people look for is how do you manage and have that balance, and at the same time still have and still be learning, still be wanting more and growing with it, because unfortunately in our culture, it's like, oh, you climb the mountain and it's done. And what you don't realize is there's another valley and another mountain on the other side. You know what I mean? It's up to you how far you go with it, and that's what I see with you sometimes, that ganas to do it.
I mean, and that's the exact thing. I think that, like, in my opinion, little old me, I'm just I think brother Yassine Bey said it right, when he rapped as Most Def, I'm just a simple man. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm a simple man. Like, in my opinion, I think that's where folks get it wrong, Like, I don't believe that you arrive and you've made it, I have learned in my tradition at 12 years old as a priest ain't nothing. Like, I am still a baby. I've sat with priests who are 30, 40 years old and they're still learning. I've sat with priests who are 5 years old as a priest and have all kinds of knowledge. I mean, we're all in different places. I still have a lot to learn. I'm a simple man trying to do the best that I can. I have a lot to learn. I don't have it all figured out, and some people put extras on it and they think that, like, I have it all figured out, and I don't. I'm just trying to do the best that I can. And it takes a whole village, it really, really does. I'm going to make mistakes. And I've also learned, as, using the term as a Yalder, I've also learned that some elders don't have it all together either.
Yes, absolutely.
And I've also learned that there's a difference between salt and pepper hair and white hair, and that I've also participated and seen the humbleness of elders with white hair needing prayers and needing ceremonies done for them and asking me to support them in ceremonies and in their learning. And when I was asked to participate in prayers in a healing ceremony for my elders, I was like, what? You need prayers and support from me? That to me was a very humbling experience. Because I'm like, you're the one who's supposed to have it all together. Like, I go to you for help. Now that's where I was like, oh, so you don't arrive. that was a very humbling experience and a really good lesson, you know? You know, I have a godson in the tradition who could be my father. And I am responsible for his spiritual development. And he has a son who is about a year or two older than me. What does that say? And I had a hard time accepting him as a godchild. I was head tripping, you know? And my madrina, my godmother, was like, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to support you. But here's the responsibility, and here's what your responsibility entails, and here's why. You know, but it's all a give and take. You know, we have responsibilities. There's a sacred duty. But then there's also, I think, a humbleness that we need to approach our work in. We all have something to learn and grow in. There's always room for growth and learning. I get nervous when somebody says that they have it all figured out or they don't need to learn.
Yeah, there's always those situations that you think you know, and then you're like, well, obviously I did not know. And I think we all need those moments where you get your, spiritually, you get your, you get a kick in the butt. And you're like, you think you know, you get a little cocky, and you get put in your place. Like, I don't look for those, but when they happen, I could only be humbled by it. Only be looking for those blessings for it. It's one of those things, and I really appreciate your outlook around taking this responsibility and the way you look at even your learning, your growth as in your position, and helping guide this your godson and godchild in this way. It's a beautiful thing, because in our what we would call our regular or outside culture, there's just so lack of understanding. You know what I mean? So to kind of wrap this up, I think a lot of people, the question I hear a lot is, how do you come to terms really with your own healing and your own health and growth? Because I think as you're learning and you're doing stuff, all your everyday work, you're doing all this stuff, and I know there's you already have it in your mind. It's every day. This is that's the way I was taught too. It's an everyday thing. Like when I accepted a certain teachings, it's my everyday thing. It's not, I can't put it away and say, oh, I'm done with it. It's every day, and it affects the way I talk, the way I think, everything. And there's a lot of people out there, whatever age bracket, whatever, they're still in this flux, that healing journey. What advice can you give them, just as you are, to help them with that and to find that? Because I think in all of what Healing Generations Institute is all about is, how do we support people in healing, support people in growth? Because I do believe in that. When you heal, I heal. The better you are, the better I am. We have to have friendships that are supportive of one another. Like, it's beautiful that your family came around. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have that experience that you had. My experience was probably more, my parents were Mexicanos and I was Chicano. To them, they thought, what? That's not you. But it's like, no, it's me. I'm the bald head homie that you guys don't like in the street. Well, I'm that same dude, and I live right here in your house. That's as close as I get to that. But you dealt with that because of historical fears and things like that. You deal with it differently. But what advice can you give to those young people in that phase of their life and that are going through it? Regardless, to me, I think it's still a fearful time for the LGBT plus community in a lot of ways. And our young people, I learned this even from my own kids, just how more accepting they are than our generation was. Even me, of my generation, I had acceptance because of my cousin. I loved him. I didn't really trip, too much. I didn't really trip on things like that. But I know a lot of people who did, and especially Catholics, and that your parents are Catholic and they found a way to accept you and all that. What is that advice?
I would say that an important thing for me that I've learned, all I can do is just share what I've learned, right? An important thing for me is developing, and I think that I see it reflected in Healing Generations Institute, right? I think developing a multi-generational system of support. And that's important, from little ones to white hair, you know? And it's very real for me. And I've said this before in many circles I'm in because it's real. And I'll say it here. I don't know if you've ever heard me say this before, but I'll say this, and I want the listeners to know my truth. I have been in community, and I'm pretty out there in terms of professionally, politically, socially. My partner and I do a lot, are in many different spaces, political circles. Again, I think we're connected. I'm connected.
Mm-hmm.
I do not know in my circle, I do not have a phone number in my phone of a healthy, sane, okay, healthy and sane are important, queer Chicano man over the age of 60, healthy and sane on my phone.
Mm.
I do not have a queer Chicano elder man over the age of 60 on my phone that I can call as an elder to seek counsel from. I have plenty of men my age. I now have met and know lots of men younger my age, have lots of, young friends and men that I mentor, and little nephews and little sisters, as we'll call them,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that. I don't have that. I know some unhealthy men. I know some men who aren't really good models of healthy behavior. I don't have them in my phone. I know who
Mm-hmm.
they are. I might turn the other way when I see them, or I keep my distance. I know plenty of mujeres, lots of mujeres, lots of lesbians, lots of queer women, because queer women have always taken care of us.
Mm-hmm.
Always. Women have always taken care of us. In my spiritual community, lots of queer women. My elders, Black queer women, Boricuas, Cubana, lots of that. I know African American or Black men that I could turn to for support,
Mm-hmm.
queer men, but I don't know queer Chicano men who have survived
Mm-hmm.
and are healthy and sane, and I could turn to for support. So what do? I turn to the next best thing. And that's when I turn to the Jerrys.
Mm-hmm.
I turn to other men who are tios that are the next closest thing there.
Mm-hmm.
They may not be exact the same, but I build that multi-generational system of support. I turn to my blood tios, to other men that I know, in my community that have supported me. I turn to other community members. I turn to other tias. I turn to other friends, to colleagues, to mentors. Maybe if they're not 60, maybe they're in their late 50s. I turn to other people who support me and my partner, who support my friends and family. So I say that because that's what I try to do, to build a system of support who's going to support me, who's going to support my partner, who's going to support us as a couple, who wants us to thrive, who wants us to see us successful. We've been together 11 years, who wants to see us be together another 25 years, in a
Mm-hmm.
loving, affirming way, to be us both individually, collectively, being our best selves, that we could turn to for support, that we could turn to when we have some challenges. Those are the things that I would say are important, You know, those
Mm.
are the things I would say that if you can't get exactly what you're looking for, then in the meantime, we build what we can, because you may not find exactly what you're looking for, but there's people who can fill that space in between until we get there. We
Mm.
build that there. I'm gonna find somebody. I know I will. But until then, there's plenty of other love and loving people who will be able to show up until that happens. You know, whatever reason I haven't been able to find that, whether it's disease, drugs, unhealthiness, the pandemic that's, taken an entire generation out, whatever it may be, incarceration, HIV, any other social determinants of health, whatever it may be, we can say whatever it is. I haven't been able to find that yet, but I will. And until then, there's plenty of other folks who can offer that love and affirmation until then. And I
Mm-hmm.
hope to be there when I'm 60 years old for other people, and other young folks or community members or family in the meantime.
That's beautiful. Just to put a little bit on that, in Denver, when I lived in Denver, there was a lot of groups, a lot of young, queer identifying, LGBTQ, various loved. They were a group called the Bead Seeds. I think that's what it was called. They were youth activists. They were doing their thing, and they used to tell me that we want to find an outlet for us, and I totally. I felt for them. I supported them when they asked me to. And whenever they needed
Mm-hmm.
help, I was there for them. But I know what they wanted. And hearing that from you, you know, I could tell it is a big problem. And
Mm-hmm.
I hope, I know a few. I've had some mentors in my life who were gay, who were beautiful artists, dancers, and these guys don't really know him the way I know him because he's more in the dancing community, like ballet folklore, Aztec dancing, all this kind of stuff. But he influenced a lot on me, and man, he's a beautiful man. His name is Lorenzo Ramirez from Denver. He's an artist. He was very involved in the movement. So I only know one, that I would say is healthy like that, But he also is sick, he struggles. And but I still there's just a few, and I hear this plea. I've heard it from youth in Oakland. I've heard it from youth in Los Angeles. I've heard it from youth all over, and I want that for them. I really do. I pray for it,
Mm-hmm.
and when you get there, you're going to be an excellent one. And I hope through your work, there's other brothers, family, even in that can step up to that role for your community and for essentially it's our communities. We need that. We need that
Absolutely.
balance. We
We
need
need
the
that.
balance. And many, like you said, in the lesbian community, there's a bunch. They're real supportive. I have many aunties, that whip me into shape many times.
Yep.
And I and
Absolutely.
I
Me
I know-
too.
and I love them for that. I love them for that. And that's the thing about men. We're the tough. We pretend to be the tough guys no matter where, no matter what you identify with. But our vulnerability is that stepping up, And I think that's what Jerry's always talking about we have to show up. We have to step up. We have to be there, and build that community. That's the only way this dream of an intergenerational movement of healing is going to happen. I truly believe in that. So I want to take the time to thank you, bro. Give you much love, respect. You know what I mean? And your partner as well. I only got to meet him once, but I always talked about him. I was happy I got to tell him to his face all the beautiful things you tell us about him and shared your story with him. And I really appreciate that, because sometimes we do the work, like we see each other all the time, but we don't see who our partners are, who our children are, other than Facebook or something, you know what I mean? So when I get the chance to meet my bro's family, I love it. I want to take that opportunity to tell them, hey, they talk about you. They because a lot of times they think they're out there, do they even talk about me? And I want them to hear that, and I know it's beautiful when my wife hears that. I know when my kids hear that, they really enjoy hearing the stories, but before I transition out with the kind of our goodbyes and stuff like that, I just wanted to ask you if there's any way, if people want to learn about your work or anything that you're doing, is there any way they can follow you on something? I don't know what platforms you're on or if there's any way, if not, to find you on the internet somehow.
Sure. Yeah. I am on, what am I on? Instagram, Eshutolu. Look for me on Instagram,
It's all right.
Yep.
Well, thank you again, bro. And so with that, I want to thank all our listeners. I really appreciate you. The feedback we get is so beautiful. It's so touching in many different ways, And, if we could just get more people to share about that it's all right to be human. It's all right to be vulnerable. It's all right to be loving. It's all right to be engaged in healthy behavior. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean you don't want to have fun. It doesn't mean you don't want to be whoever you're trying to be. You know what I mean? I just want to encourage each and every one of you to find something that uplifts you, and support your family if you can. And sometimes I get it. Your chosen family is the one that supports you. Well, support them too. Show them that unconditional love that we all deserve. And I want to remind you, if you want to learn more about Healing Generations, you could go to anywhere you find your podcast, be it Apple, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio. Look for Healing Generations podcast. Share it. Let people know about it. There's many. We have mujeres. We have young people spreading their word. Man, so many different messages. Dr. Beto. There are all these different people who have so many amazing stories. So with that, I want to thank you again, bro, and just say, Mashikatiawi, I hope.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.